what to do if you don't have access to the cloud. So in most of the roles in the industry and most organizations today are using the cloud. Some are starting the journey, some are more mature, sometimes organizations are fully cloud. But there's still organizations or sometimes teams that don't have access to the cloud. That might be because of country regulations of where they are, that maybe the data can't leave the country. That can be because they're in a very, very regulated industry. Maybe the particular company is still getting comfortable with cloud and they're doing trials in other areas, etc. There's multiple ways why a team, an analytics team, won't have access to the cloud. Here's some things that you can do if you don't have access to the cloud. So some of the things that I've done in the past when I've been in that predicament is often it's difficult to get, well, I should say, what I've done is first buy hardware. And usually I try to buy a server for the team that's the biggest that I can get, either on a corporate credit card or either through a vendor that they can invoice, etc. I try to get the biggest server that I can get for the team so we can have something internally with us. And yes, that's provisioning our own hardware. If provisioning the hardware through technology is not feasible or too slow, but that should definitely be your first option. So get hardware for the team. Get the biggest server. I've been in one of my roles, I walked in with a big box of the biggest server I could find, and I had big grin because I knew that we were able to power the team as a result. And then secondly, the second piece of advice is go open source. So we used open source databases and open source programming languages like R and Python. We use those in this server to run the data internally. Now, this server inside the organization, it did not have access to the internet. It was only, you only were able to plug in physically, and only the team had access to it, which is definitely a good fallback solution. So leveraging open source is great, focusing on coding, being able to generate outputs from there. And from R and Python, you can even automatically create PowerPoints, for example, or Word documents, PDFs, etc. So we'll talk more about that in the next video. And then a third piece is to get some data in. And I've had roles where I've had a data science team in very regulated organizations where we have not been given permission to access the enterprise data warehouse. So we've literally had a data science team with no access to data, obviously crippling to say the least. And in those cases, you have to get creative. What I did in that particular instance was I tried to find a provider that provided services to the organization, and that they had the data. They had some form of data that would be useful. So I meant talking to everyone I knew internally in the organization, everyone that I knew that had worked in this organization, and then all of their friends and all of their friends, and kind of like try to follow the network. And then eventually somebody said, oh, there's this company that was providing this particular service. They would probably have the data. I ended up calling the founder of that company and I said, hey, you have this organization's data. I'm from that organization. I want to buy that data back from you. So obviously, this is like a crazy extreme example, but it was necessary to provision our hardware, provision our software, provision our data. And for the data component, I ended up buying the data from I ended up buying this organization's data from an external provider. And that allowed us as a team to get started, to prove value, to get involved in the organization. And then we started getting the support that we needed internally. And then a couple of years down the road, the cloud trials that were happening were successful, and then we get access to the cloud, and then obviously the world changed. But there's still many people that don't have access to the cloud. So those are my tips to provision your own hardware, your own software with open source, and your own data as much as you can. With the software, it doesn't have to be open source. A lot of teams are still upskilling people to be comfortable with coding. There's a lot of software where you can install locally and do a lot of analytics, especially with a nice front end. So definitely look at alternatives if you have the budget. But those are my tips on how to handle the world of no cloud. Let me know what you guys have done. How do you handle this? What tips do you have for people in this scenario? I hope this is helpful. See you in the next video.